Hi, I'm Eric, and I am the clockmaker here at Hart Square. Clockmaking has been around since the early 1700s. Clocks primarily started in the Black Hills of Switzerland, as they call it now, the Black Forest of Switzerland, and after a while they predominantly came to the United States of America. Clocks predate watches by at least 75 to maybe 80 years. The oldest watch that you'll usually find is somewhere in it might be in the late 1700s, early 1800s. But clocks, they go from anywhere. They found clocks from anything from 1712 all the way through. And then you have clocks all the way through until modern day clocks. And here at Hart Square, we have a very large collection of watches, clocks. I'll get right here in a minute. We've got them all the way from late 1700s all the way up to 1860 as the clocks here. We approximately have 46 clocks that actually works in this village. And this is you'll see that some of the locks, some of the tools that you'll use and everything. Your clockmaker would be more predominantly, he would have more of the small tools and stuff. So with that, he would actually do some smaller work if somebody wanted it. Blacksmithing, for instance, the blacksmiths made a lot of the actions for the flintlock rifles, but he would go to the clockmaker to make the smaller pieces that he didn't have the equipment to do it. So your clockmaker, he would come up and make the small pieces, then give it off to the smith, and then they would make a gun out of it. Also, some of your early clockmakers also was responsible for locks. They made some locks. Some of the very first steel and brass patent locks that came out with it came out from a clockmaker. So a clockmaker was kind of diverse. This right here, this is your modern movement you're going to find these days. This one here is from about 1830, 1840, somewhere in that area. This is predominantly about the movement you're going to find in most of the clocks here at Hart Square. And then you've got your watches here on the other hand. Watches didn't come in the scene till way on later. And when watches first came in the scene, you carried them in your pocket. They was called pocket watches. You carried them in your pocket with you. When you got through with it of a night time, you would lay it on your table. Next morning, of course, you had to wind it up. Every day you had to wind it up. We don't have the luxury and convenience we do today, of quartz watches and automatic watches. And as watches progressed, they actually started making smaller watches that was about the size of a quarter, and then that's when that they started making wrist watches. So they was actually taking pocket watches, cutting them down to smaller sizes, and putting them on strap-on to where you could use them on your arm if you wanted to. This came out probably 1830, 1840, somewhere along in that. But that's all it was old. This is an old pocket watch here, and the only thing they do is they would just take this and make it into a watch to wear on your shoulder, or on your wrist. And but clock periods in this time period, which is this about 1840, 1850 movement here, all the keys was cut by hand. They would take a metal or a brass or whatever it was, piece of flat brass. They would lay it on the table, and usually they had a pattern. And the way they had a pattern is because the clockmakers, if he got an old clock that wasn't worth fixing, he would actually take that apart and keep the pieces, and he could use it for different things. If he needed to make another like that, then he could take that, draw it around on his piece of brass. And at that time, you would take a small jeweler's saw, and you would saw the teeth all the way around it. Now, coming on up into the 1870s, 1880s, they've come out with machinery then that made them. And a lot of people think on your clocks, when you see gears in them and stuff, we have several out here that is wooden. It has wooden gears. All the gears are wooden in it. The front plates, the back plates wooden in it. The only thing that's not wooden is the bell and in the center shaft, your center pinion, and then on each one of your wheels you have a steel pinion, because if they put brass against steel to keep down on the wear and tear and to make them last a lot longer. So, every piece of this was made. Every piece of this was made by hand by someone. They've actually sit down, and this would probably take a clocksmith. It would take him probably a month and a half to make this. Then once he got it made, he would take this to the cabinet maker or the guy that done the furniture in town or something. And he would say, here, make a nice clock case for this. So he would make a clock case, your clock maker would bring it back, and he would place it in the case for you. Then farther on up in the years, you could go and you could buy a clock with the movements already in it. Much like also I explained to you earlier about the watches, the pocket watches. When you went to buy a pocket watch in those older days, when you walked in, you would have a selection of cases, and you would have a selection of watches. Now, when you bought a watch back then, you got it in this right here. This is what you was buying. You was buying a movement. That's all you was buying. You was buying the movement. You picked the movement that you like. You picked the case that you like. They sell you the case, they sell you the movement, you take them to the watchman, he puts them together for you. That way you can have a sterling silver case, a gold case, whatever you want. Of course, the higher, it just goes up in height, And the same way with watches, but usually back then, a general good pocket watch, about 21 jewel pocket watch, would be somewhere around about $15, $16 in mid-1800s. To where today, that same pocket watch is worth probably $400 to $500. Clock making has been around for many, many years. It started in the early 1700s. You learned clock repair. Back then, you didn't have schools that you could go to, like they might have had in the overseas, like Switzerland and stuff like that. You predominantly learned the trade from your grandfather, your father, or whatever. I know some gentlemen right now that's fifth and sixth generation watchmakers. That's all their fathers done, so that's all they done. They just took over the business when the father got too old to do it. And they made every piece of these clocks by hand. So back then, when it comes to education back then, you would learn every bit of this from a grown-up or from someone else. You could actually go to the clock shop or whatever in your village, and you could say, I want to apprentice with you. And he would say, okay, and he would take you in, and he would actually apprentice with you.